My husband and my daughter-in-law planned to take everything from me in a divorce. So I smiled, signed the papers, and let them have the house. They thought they had won. They didn't realize they had just started a 60-day countdown to their own ruin. What would you do in my place? This is the story of how my silence became a weapon. My story begins not with a bang, but with the almost imperceptible hum of a house holding its breath. It's a sound I came to know intimately in the final years of my 50-year marriage to Robert. It was the sound of things left unsaid, of truths sealed behind drywall and buried beneath the polished hardwood floors of our home in Richmond, Virginia. For decades, this house had been filled with the noise of a life being built, the laughter of our son, Jason, the confident stride of Robert returning from the office, the clatter of my own work in the kitchen and garden. I had orchestrated our life as a symphony of comfort and support, ensuring every note was perfectly placed so that Robert's ambition could flourish unburdened. I was the silent partner in his success. When his fledgling architectural firm needed a foundation, I poured my own inheritance into it without a second thought, the money left to me by my father, a man who believed in building things to last. I managed the books in the early days, my careful ledgers a testament to a practicality Robert called quaint, but relied upon utterly. When Jason was born, I set aside my own aspirations to cultivate a home that was a sanctuary, a stable ground from which my husband and son could launch themselves into the world each day. I was the keeper of schedules, the mender of scrapes both physical and emotional, the steady, predictable force that allowed for their brilliant, unpredictable orbits. I did not see it as a sacrifice then. I saw it as the construction of a legacy, a family built on the bedrock of my love. It was a love I believed was mutual, a foundation I assumed was unshakable. But foundations can crack in silence, and houses can grow cold from the inside out. The hum I learned to recognize was the sound of that decay, a low, resonant frequency of absence in the midst of presence. It was the sound of a story ending, long before anyone had the courage to speak the final words. I had become a tolerated ghost in my own home. I was never in the way. I was the foundation. They called me dead weight, but they were the ones standing on the ground I provided. The quiet resignation of those years was not weakness. It was the slow collection of evidence, the patient gathering of strength. I watched, I listened, and I remembered. Because I knew even then that paper remembers what people choose to forget. And my memory, like the ink on a deed, does not fade. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a testament to the fact that wisdom doesn't shout. It waits. I'm Eleanor Vance, and I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my truth has reached. Chloe, my son. Jason's wife arrived in our lives like a change in the weather, a sudden, vibrant front that promised sunshine, but carried the scent of a storm. She was beautiful, of course, with a modern, sharp-edged confidence that made my own quiet dignity feel like something from a dusty photograph. Jason was utterly captivated, his love for her, so blinding that he saw her ambition as strength and her calculation as intelligence. In my desire for my son's happiness, I did what any mother would do. I opened my home and my heart. I welcomed her. I taught her the recipes my grandmother had passed down to me, the secrets to a flaky pie crust and a slow-simmered Sunday sauce. I showed her the garden, explaining the rhythms of the Virginia soil, which roses needed pruning in the late winter, which herbs would thrive in the humid summer. I made space for her in the family traditions I had so carefully curated over 50 years. I did not realize then that she was not learning my traditions to honor them. She was studying them as an enemy general studies a map of the battlefield. She was looking for weaknesses, for entry points, for ways to dismantle the entire structure from within. The slow eraser began its work so subtly, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. It started with my collection of porcelain birds. Delicate figures that had sat on the mantelpiece since Jason was a boy. One day, they were gone, replaced by a stark, polished steel sculpture that looked like a tangle of sharp angles. "Just freshening things up, Eleanor," Chloe said, with a dazzling smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Bringing the house into the 21st century." I said nothing. Soon the family photographs that lined the hallway began to change. The large print of Robert and me on our 25th anniversary was replaced by a modern abstract painting. Group shots that included me were swapped for photos of just the kids. Then just our family unit, a unit that seemed to consist of herself, Jason, and with increasing frequency, Robert. I was being edited out of my own history, one frame at a time. It was the perfume that became the true harbinger of the betrayal. It was an expensive, cloying fragrance, a heavy floral that announced her presence before she entered a room and lingered long after she left. It was the scent of invasion. I began to find it in places it had no right to be. Faintly on the leather of Robert's armchair in his study. Once on a throw pillow on his side of our bed. It was a territorial marking, a claim being staked in the most intimate corners of my life. Her physical affection for Robert also felt wrong, pitched at a key just slightly off. It was performatively filial, full of bright laughter, and a hand that rested on his arm a moment too long. "Oh, Robert, you're just brilliant." She would coo, deferring to his opinion with a reverence she never showed her own husband, my son. And Jason would stand by, beaming proud of the easy rapport his wife had built with his father. He couldn't see that he wasn't witnessing the creation of a bond, but the execution of a plan. Have you ever welcomed someone into your home only to realize you've invited in an invader? I watched it all, and for the first time in my life, I understood that I was not in a family. I was in a siege. And I did not yet know that the enemy was already inside the castle walls. The moment of absolute certainty, the point of no return, arrived not in a storm of shouting, but in a quiet sliver of autumn sunlight. It was a Tuesday afternoon in October, the kind of crisp, brilliant day that Virginia does so well. The air smelled of wood smoke and decaying leaves, and the low sun slanted through the kitchen windows, illuminating a million tiny dust motes dancing in the air like constellations. I was at the counter, spooning tea leaves into a pot, my movements slow and deliberate. The familiar ritual a small comfort in a house that no longer felt comfortable. That's when Robert and Chloe came in from the garden. They were laughing, their heads close together, flushed from the cool air. Chloe had taken over the landscaping plans with a ferocious energy, ripping out my perennial beds of peonies and Iris's flowers she called fussy and old-fashioned, to replace them with severe modern grasses and architectural shrubs. She was erasing my signature from the very soil of the property. As they stepped inside, Robert reached out and brushed a stray leaf from Chloe's dark hair. It should have been a simple paternal gesture, the kind a fond father-in-law might make toward the wife of his son. But then their eyes met. And in that glance, which lasted no more than 2 seconds, an entire sordid story was told. It was a look of such profound and shared intimacy, a look of illicit partnership and secret knowledge, that it struck me with the force of a physical blow. There was a possessiveness in his gaze and a soft, yielding recognition in hers that had nothing to do with family. It was the glance of conspirators of lovers. The moment shattered when they saw me standing by the counter, the silver tea caddy clutched in my hand. Their shared smile vanished, replaced by masks of polite, separate composure. Chloe's face snapped into its familiar, bright, brittle smile. Eleanor, we were just deciding where to put the new Japanese maples. Robert has the most brilliant ideas. Robert cleared his throat, his gaze sliding past me to a point somewhere on the far wall. Yes. He set his voice a full register higher than usual. The market was up 3 points today. Remarkable volatility. They thought I hadn't seen. They believed their secret was safe, hidden behind a flimsy curtain of chatter about gardening and stocks. They saw an old woman making tea, a fixture in the kitchen, as unremarkable as the refrigerator's hum. They didn't see the exact moment her heart turned to stone. I said nothing. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, my hand perfectly steady. I served them tea and listened to the cadence of their lies, their voices a hollow echo in a room suddenly vast and cold. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. The shock had built a fortress inside me, and behind its walls a part of my mind that had been dormant for decades began to wake up. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a mother-in-law. I was a witness. And the home I had built was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene. And I was the sole, silent detective on the case. To understand what happened next, you must understand my father. He was a builder, a man who believed in solid things, brick oak, and promises kept. He distrusted anything that was merely spoken, anything that couldn't be held in your hand or verified on paper. Paper remembers what people forget. Eleanor. He used to tell me, his hands calloused and dusty, from a lifetime of constructing things that were meant to last. When I brought Robert home, charming, handsome, an architect, with a portfolio of brilliant dreams and an empty bank account, my father was cautious. He saw the fire in Robert's ambition, but he also saw that the man's foundations were built on sand. He saw the charm, and he looked for the substance beneath it. Before he passed away, my father gifted us the seeds of the life we would build, but his generosity was girded with the steel of his pragmatism. He did not simply hand over a check. The magnificent colonial house on a quiet, tree-lined street in Richmond was not a wedding gift to us both. The substantial down payment came from my inheritance and my father's lawyer, a stern, no-nonsense man named Arthur Abernathy, structured the purchase to be a fortress for my future, not a playground for my husband's ambitions. The deed was drawn up in my name and my name alone, Eleanor Vance. Not Eleanor Miller, not Mr. and Mrs. Robert Miller. It was a provision Robert had chafed at, calling it insulting and antiquated, but he was in no position to refuse. It was a detail that over 50 years of a shared life and his soaring success, he had either forgotten or more likely had willfully chosen to erase from his memory. Furthermore, my father established a trust, again in my name alone. It was an irrevocable trust, a separate legal entity managed by a conservative financial firm designed to provide for my security should anything happen to him, or as he cannily predicted to my marriage. This trust was my safety net, a secret anchor in the unpredictable storms of life. For decades, it sat untouched. As Robert's career flourished, we lived well on his income. The trust became a forgotten relic, a dusty file in a cabinet, a piece of paper that remembered a truth everyone else, including the man I had built a life with, had conveniently forgotten. These were not our assets. They were my assets. The house was not our house. It was my house. The legacy was not our legacy. It was the one my father had built to protect me. And that distinction, that simple black and white fact, documented on aging paper, was about to become the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. They thought they were taking from a partner. They had no idea they were trying to rob the sole proprietor. The house grew quieter after that day in the garden. The hum of unspoken truths intensified, shifting from a low, melancholic drone into something that felt like a predatory growl. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, a curator in a museum of my own life, while the new occupants, my husband and my daughter-in-law, plotted its demolition. They grew bolder. Their conspiracy was no longer confined to stolen glances and the lingering scent of perfume. It took on the solid, practical shape of a business plan. They believed I was oblivious, a relic from a bygone era, deaf and blind to the modern machinations of their affair. They mistook my silence for weakness, my quiet composure for mental frailty. It was a fatal error in judgment, an underestimation that would cost them everything. I began to stay up late long after the house had settled into its restless sleep. I would sit in the darkness at the top of the stairs, a vantage point that offered a clear auditory channel to Robert's study below. It was there they held their late-night meetings, cloaked in the guise of Chloe, helping her father-in-law organize his finances for retirement. Their voices, low and conspiratorial, drifted up to me, weaving a blueprint for my complete and utter destruction. "She's so fragile, Rob," I heard Chloe's voice murmur one night, thick with a false, syrupy concern. "We have to handle this with the utmost delicacy. If she thinks it's a battle, she'll completely crumble. The shock could be too much for her. We have to frame it as a release, as a kindness. An amicable divorce." Robert's voice replied the words, clinical and cold. He spoke of our 50-year marriage as if it were a poorly performing stock to be divested from his portfolio. We emphasize that it's about giving her peace. No stress, no fighting. She signs the papers thinking she's securing a quiet, comfortable retirement, and we handle the rest. She trusts me to do what's best. The house, the accounts, she doesn't understand any of it. Chloe continued, her voice laced with a barely concealed contempt. She still thinks stocks are something you find in soup. She'll be so grateful we're taking care of all the complicated details. We just need a comprehensive settlement agreement. Everything transferred to you cleanly. And then we can finally start our life without all this dead weight. Dead weight. That's what I had become. The woman who had poured her inheritance into his first business, who had raised his son, who had built the very walls around them. I listened from the shadows. My heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. Each word was a nail being hammered into the coffin of the life I had known. They were not just planning a divorce. They were planning a heist. They were going to strip me of everything I had built, everything my father had secured for me, and they were going to do it with a sympathetic smile and a reassuring pat on the hand. I retreated to my room, the echo of their plotting ringing in my ears. I did not weep. I began to think. They had their blueprint. It was time for me to pull out my own. They chose our 50th wedding anniversary to present me with the final, most profound insult of my life. The cruelty of the timing was a masterpiece of calculation. A day that should have been marked by gold, by celebration, by the acknowledgement of a half-century of shared history, became the day they handed me the instrument of my own erasure gift, wrapped in the language of compassion. Robert had insisted on a quiet dinner at home, a family-only affair. Chloe cooked an elaborate multi-course meal that felt more like a theatrical production than an act of love. She moved around my kitchen with an unnerving proprietary air, as if she were already its sole mistress. Jason was there, a ghost at the table, his gaze skittering away from mine whenever I tried to meet it. The silence between courses was heavy, suffocating. After the main course, as Chloe cleared the plates with bustling efficiency, Robert cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that filled the tense room. He reached over and took my hand. His skin was dry and cool, his touch devoid of the warmth I remembered. Eleanor. He began, his voice practiced and smooth, the voice of a man delivering a well-rehearsed speech. We've had a long and wonderful life together. 50 years. It's an incredible milestone, and I'll always cherish the memories. Chloe nodded from across the table, her face a perfect mask of solemn sympathy. But people change, he continued. We're not the same two kids who got married all those years ago. And I think we both deserve to find peace in our final chapters. True peace without any burdens. He slid a sheaf of papers across the polished mahogany table. It was bound in a neat blue folder, like a corporate proposal. This is a proposal for an amicable dissolution of our marriage. He said, the legal term sounding obscene in the context of our life together. It's all very straightforward. I've had my lawyer, Mr. Jennings, draw it up to be as simple and generous as possible. It ensures you'll be taken care of, free from any financial worries. It's a way for us to part with dignity and respect as friends. I looked at the folder. I looked at his face, so earnest and so false. I looked at Chloe, whose eyes shone with a triumphant, predatory light she could not quite conceal. And I looked at my son, Jason, who sat staring at his plate, his silence a deafening roar of complicity. They were offering me my own execution and calling it a kindness. This was not just about an affair. This was about eradication. They wanted to sever the marriage, seize the assets I had brought into it, and erase me from the history we had built, leaving them free to live in my house on my money, on the ruins of my life. The pain I had been holding at bay for months, the grief, the humiliation, it did not break me. It did not make me weep. It crystallized. In that moment, the last vestiges of the loving wife and mother fell away, and what was left was something cold, hard, and absolutely clear. They had just made the final and most costly mistake of their lives. I did not scream. I did not throw the papers in his face. I did not expose their tawdry affair in a torrent of righteous fury. My reaction was far quieter, and in its quietness, far more unsettling to them. I simply pulled my hand from Robert's cool grasp, folded my own hands in my lap, and met his gaze with a calm he could not decipher. Thank you, Robert, I said, my voice even and measured, utterly devoid of the hysteria they had anticipated. That's very considerate of you. I'll need some time to look this over, of course, to process everything." The relief in the room was a physical thing, a collective exhalation of breath. They had expected a storm, and my calm was like a placid lake they could not see the bottom of. They mistook it for shock, for the dazed acquiescence of a woman already defeated. Chloe began to clear the remaining plates with a bustling, false efficiency, chattering about how brave we both were, how this was the most mature, modern way to handle such a difficult situation. Robert launched into a monologue about his plans to travel to find himself, a cliché, so tired it was almost comical coming from a man of 75. I excused myself from the table. "If you don't mind," I said, "I think I'll have a cup of tea in the kitchen." I walked away from the wreckage of my marriage, leaving them to their self-congratulatory whispers. I did not go to my bedroom to weep. I did not go to the phone to call a friend and unload my grief. I went to the kitchen, and I did what I always did in a crisis. I simply made tea. I filled the kettle, my movements precise and unhurried. I selected a tin of strong Earl Grey, the sharp, clean scent of bergamot, a small anchor in a world that had come unmoored. As I waited for the water to boil, I stared out the window into the dark garden, the garden I had planted and tended for 50 years. The shock had built a fortress inside me so thick and high that no tear could escape. Grief was a luxury I could no longer afford. Pain was a currency that had been completely devalued. I was no longer confused. I was no longer waiting for an apology. I was no longer hoping for a last-minute reprieve. I was planning. As I poured the boiling water into the teapot, watching the steam curl like a phantom into the still air, I felt a sensation I hadn't experienced in decades. It was not anger, not despair, but something purer, something stronger. It was clarity. A cold, crystalline, and absolutely diamond-hard clarity. I didn't rise for revenge. I rose for clarity. They had shown me their hand, a weak and predictable play based on a series of false assumptions. Now it was time for me to review my own cards, and I knew with the certainty of a master strategist that I was holding a royal flush. The next morning, the house was empty. Robert and Chloe had gone out, no doubt, for a celebratory brunch to toast their impending victory. I watched them leave from the upstairs window, their laughter carrying on the crisp morning air. They looked like a triumphant couple, free and unburdened. The sight did not pain me. It focused me. I went into my study. It was the one room in the house that still felt entirely mine, lined with my books on history and gardening and the quiet ghosts of my own thoughts. I sat at the heavy oak desk that had belonged to my father, its surface scarred with the history of his own battles and plans. I picked up the heavy, old-fashioned telephone. My fingers did not tremble as I dialed a number I hadn't called in years, a number I knew by heart. The phone was answered on the second ring by a crisp, formal voice. "Abernathy, Wallace and Finch. How may I direct your call? I'd like to speak with Mr. Arthur Abernathy, please." I said, my own voice calm and steady. "Tell him it's Eleanor Vance calling." There was a brief, respectful pause, and then the familiar, reedy voice of Arthur Abernathy came on the line. He was in his 80s now, mostly retired, but he still kept a small office for his oldest clients. He was my father's lawyer, my father's friend, and the executor of his will. He was a man who, like my father, believed in the absolute sanctity of the written word. Eleanor. He said, his voice warm with genuine surprise. It's been too long. Is everything all right? You sound... He paused, searching for the right word. Formal. Everything is fine, Arthur. I lied smoothly. Better than fine, in fact. I just find myself in need of a bit of a review. Some old family documents. I was hoping I could come by your office this week. It's a matter of estate planning. I was careful with my words. I did not mention the divorce, the affair, the betrayal. I did not want to cloud the issue with the messy, unpredictable storm of emotion. This was not about marital strife. This was about legal fact. This was about the cold, hard, unassailable truth of black ink on white paper. I needed him to be the detached, meticulous lawyer my father had trusted, not a sympathetic friend offering condolences. Of course, Eleanor, he said, his voice now sharpened with professional interest. For you, my door is always open. Shall we say Thursday at 10 o'clock? We confirmed the time, and I hung up the phone. The first step had been taken. The first piece had been moved on the board. I was no longer a passive victim in their drama. I was the silent director of my own. I was leveraging the system, the formal, unassailable world of law and documentation that they, in their arrogant haste, had completely overlooked. The procedural justice I sought had begun not with an emotional confrontation, but with a quiet, dignified phone call. A call to an old friend who remembered the promises my father had made and who had helped him put them in writing. On Thursday morning, I drove into the city, a sense of quiet, steely purpose settling over me. Arthur Abernathy's office was in an old, respectable brick building on a street lined with aging oak trees. The kind of place with a manually operated elevator that smelled faintly of brass polish and old paper. Arthur himself was smaller than I remembered, his frame stooped with the gentle weight of age, but his eyes behind thick spectacles were as sharp and intelligent as ever. Eleanor, you look well, he said, taking both my hands in his. Now, what is this about? You mentioned reviewing some old documents. Yes, Arthur, I said, taking a seat in the worn leather chair across from his massive desk. I'd like to see the original file my father set up for me all those years ago. Specifically, I need to see the deed to the house on Maple Avenue and the founding charter of the Vance Family Trust. A flicker of immediate understanding crossed his face. He was a man who had seen 1,000 family dramas play out over his long career. He didn't ask why. He simply nodded, rose slowly, and went to a towering wall of file cabinets. He returned with a thick, dusty folder tied with a faded red ribbon. He laid it on the desk between us with a soft, definitive thud. Here we are, he said, the foundation of your security. Your father was a very wise man. Together we went through the papers. It was all there, written in the clear, unambiguous language of the law. It was all just as I remembered, just as my father had intended. The deed to the house, clear and unequivocal, registered with the county in 1970. To Eleanor Vance, her heirs and assigns forever. My name, my maiden name, and my name alone. Robert's name was nowhere on the document. Then the trust, an ironclad irrevocable instrument established in 1972. It named me as a sole lifetime beneficiary and sole trustee. Robert was not mentioned. Jason was named as the successor beneficiary, but only upon my death. The trust's assets, my father's legacy, could not be touched, transferred, or leveraged by anyone but me. Arthur looked at me over the top of his glasses. This is all quite definitive, Eleanor. Your father built a fortress for you. These assets are yours and yours alone. They are not marital property. No divorce settlement can touch them unless you willingly agree to liquidate them and divide the proceeds. A small smile touched my lips for the first time in months. It was not a smile of joy, but of cold, hard vindication. And Arthur, I said, my voice steady. Hypothetically, if I were to sign a settlement agreement that listed these assets as joint marital property, an agreement drawn up by another party, an agreement I signed without legal counsel of my own, what would be the legal standing of such a document regarding these specific assets? He leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his own face as he grasped the entirety of my strategy. Legally, it would be worthless paper. You cannot give away what someone else does not have the right to take. A contract based on a fundamental misrepresentation of material fact, in this case the ownership of the assets, is unenforceable from the start. It's a house of cards, Eleanor. A house of cards, I repeated softly. Exactly. My father was right. Paper remembers. And these papers remembered everything. Armed with the cold, hard facts from Arthur's office, my strategy became simple. Deceptively so. I would become the woman they believed me to be. I would embody the role they had written for me, the fragile, confused, and heartbroken wife, a lamb being led to a gentle, painless slaughter. It was a performance that required a discipline I hadn't known I possessed, a deep and sustained act of will. I was no longer just Eleanor. I was an actress, playing the part of a lifetime for an audience of two. I began my performance that evening. I called Robert, allowing a slight, calculated tremor into my voice. I've read the papers. I said, my voice soft and breathy. It's all so much to take in, Robert. I'm afraid I don't really understand all this legal language. Of course not, Eleanor. He said, his voice dripping with condescension disguised as kindness. It's complicated stuff. That's why I had Jennings handle everything. He's made it as painless as possible for you. We can have a meeting with him and he can walk you through it line by line. Chloe could come too, he added, as if the idea had just occurred to him. She's so good with these things. She can help explain. Yes, I said meekly, as if grasping at a lifeline. Yes, that would be a comfort. The performance had begun. At home, I moved with a new, deliberate slowness, a feigned fragility that they consumed with greedy satisfaction. I would pause in doorways as if I'd forgotten where I was going. I'd ask the same question twice in a single conversation, tilting my head with a look of dazed confusion. Chloe and Robert would exchange glances over my head, a mixture of pity and smug certainty. They saw a woman unraveling a mind clouded by grief and age. They didn't see the sharp, cold clarity behind my eyes. They didn't see the actress playing her part to perfection. I even let them see me crying once, sitting in the garden by the empty space where my rose bushes used to be. I didn't have to force the tears. The memory of the betrayal was still a raw wound. Chloe came out and put a cashmere shawl around my shoulders, her touch as light and false as her words. It's for the best, Eleanor. She whispered, her voice a silken lie. You'll see. This'll be a new beginning for you, a chance to rest. I looked up at her, my eyes full of manufactured helplessness, and nodded gratefully. I let her believe she was comforting me. I let her think her deception was working flawlessly. Every act of false sympathy, every patronizing word, was another thread in the web I was allowing them to weave around themselves. They were so confident in my weakness, so sure of their own brilliance, that they never once thought to question it. They never thought to ask why the lamb was walking so willingly toward the cliff's edge. The meeting was held at the downtown offices of Jennings and Howe, a law firm, with plush carpets, imposing mahogany furniture, and an air of expensive corporate ruthlessness. It was a world away from the dusty, honorable office of Arthur Abernathy. This was a place where victories were won, not where truths were honored. Robert's lawyer, a man named Mr. Jennings, was the perfect embodiment of his surroundings. He had a politician's easy smile and a shark's cold, predatory eyes. We sat at a vast, polished table that felt as long as a banquet hall. Robert was on one side, and I sat alone on the other. Chloe, in a sharp, tailored suit, sat beside Robert, a leather-bound folio open in front of her. She was playing the part of the devoted, intelligent aide, the savvy mind, helping her beloved father-in-law navigate these tricky waters. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. Eleanor. Jennings began, his voice a smooth, reassuring purr. Thank you for coming in. As Robert has explained, our sole goal here is to make this transition as seamless and amicable as possible. We've drafted a settlement that we believe is exceptionally fair and provides for your every conceivable need. He slid a heavy copy of the settlement across the table to me. I put on my reading glasses, a prop for my performance, and pretended to study the dense pages, my brow furrowed in manufactured concentration. My eyes scanned the clauses I already knew were there, the ones I had heard them plotting from my perch at the top of the stairs. Item 4A. The marital home located at 12 Maple Avenue shall be signed over in its entirety to Robert Miller. Item 5C. The assets held within the Vance Miller Family Trust shall be transferred to the sole stewardship of Robert Miller to manage on behalf of the family. The Vance Miller Family Trust, a legal fiction they had invented, a name they had concocted to give their theft a veneer of legitimacy. It all seems so final. I said, my voice soft and wavering. I looked up from the papers, my eyes wide with feigned confusion. I let my gaze rest on Jennings. The house? I've lived there for 50 years. And you'll be leaving it with a very generous settlement, Eleanor. Chloe interjected gently, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She leaned forward and pointed to another clause with a perfectly manicured finger. Look, Robert is providing you with a substantial lump sum payment. It will allow you to find a lovely, smaller place, something more manageable for you. No more stairs, no big yard to worry about. Yes, Robert added, nodding solemnly, his face a mask of paternal concern. It's about your comfort, my dear. We've truly thought of everything. They had indeed thought of everything except the one thing that mattered, the truth. They were asking me to sign away a house that I owned and a trust that I controlled, all under the fraudulent assumption that these were joint assets they had a right to. I simply nodded slowly. "I see," I said. "You've been very thorough." I did not mention that I had no lawyer of my own present. They did not ask. Why would they? The lamb, after all, has no need for a wolf of its own. They saw my compliance as the final confirmation of their victory. They had no idea it was the final critical step in my own plan. Before I agreed to sign away my life on paper, I knew I had to make one final attempt to reach my son. It was a foolish, sentimental hope, a mother's last desperate prayer against the encroaching darkness. But I had to know for certain where he stood. Not as a husband, but as a son. I invited Jason to lunch, just the two of us at a small, quiet cafe downtown. Chloe was not happy about it. I could hear her sharp, interrogating whispers to Jason on the phone. But she could hardly refuse without revealing the bars of the cage she had built around him. Jason arrived looking tense and uncomfortable, a man caught between two warring nations. He ordered coffee and avoided my eyes, studying the menu as if it held the secrets of the universe. I let the silence sit between us for a long moment before I spoke, my voice gentle. "Jason," I said softly, "your father and I are getting a divorce." "I know, Mom," he mumbled into his cup. "Dad told me. I think it's for the best." He was reciting a line, a script he had been fed and forced to memorize. "Do you?" I asked, my voice still soft, but with an edge of steel he couldn't ignore. "Do you think it's for the best that after 50 years of marriage, I'm being asked to leave my home, the home you grew up in?" He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the picture of a man cornered. "Mom, Dad, and Chloe have it all worked out. They've made sure you'll be comfortable. You'll get a nice apartment. It'll be easier for you, less to worry about." The use of Dad and Chloe as a single decision-making entity was not lost on me. They were a team. I was the opposition. I decided to push one last time to give him one final chance to be the son I had raised. "And what about the way this is being handled? Jason, does it feel right to you? Does it feel kind?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were not filled with sorrow or conflict, but with a weak, resentful anger. An anger at me for making him uncomfortable, for forcing him to confront the ugliness of his own complicity. "Mom, what do you want me to do?" He snapped, his voice tight. "They're adults. This is between them. Chloe says you're just being emotional and you're confused by all the finances. She's just trying to help make this smooth for everyone. Honestly, you should be grateful she's so involved in taking care of you." And there it was. The final, unequivocal betrayal. The nail in the coffin. He was not a passive bystander. He was an active accomplice. He had chosen them. He had chosen the lies, the convenience, the shiny new family unit his wife was building on the wreckage of his old one. The immense unconditional love I had for him, the love of a mother for her only child, did not vanish in that moment, but it was walled off, sealed away in a part of my heart that was now permanently closed for renovation. I paid for our lunch, leaned across the table, and kissed his cheek a final cold farewell. Then I walked away. I had lost a husband, a daughter-in-law, and now a son. I was truly, utterly alone. And in that absolute solitude, I found a strange and terrible strength. There was nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing left to fear. The day of the signing was a masterpiece of contrived solemnity. We gathered again around the vast mahogany table in Mr. Jennings's office, the stage for the final act of my humiliation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather wood polish and their barely concealed triumph. Robert wore a somber gray suit, the perfect costume for his role as the grieving but resolute husband. Chloe was dressed in a chic professional dress, her expression a careful blend of sorrow for me and resolve for her future. She was the architect of this moment, the director of this play, and she was savoring every second of her victory. Mr. Jennings presented the final notarized documents with a grave air, as if he were presenting a eulogy. "Now, Eleanor," he began, his voice smooth and reassuring, "as a final formality, are you absolutely certain you don't wish to have your own counsel review this agreement?" It was a perfunctory question, a box to be ticked on his legal checklist, nothing more. "No," I said, my voice a soft, tremulous whisper, the voice of a woman who has already surrendered. "I trust Robert. I trust he has done what is best. I just want this to be over." Robert reached across the vast expanse of the table and patted my hand, a gesture of magnanimous pity. "It will be soon, my dear," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "This is the last hard part, and then you can rest." I looked at his face, a face I had loved for half a century now, a mask for a stranger I no longer recognized. I saw the greed in his eyes, the impatience to have it all, the man he had become, or perhaps the man he had always been, hidden beneath the veneer of success that I had helped him build. I thought of my father, of his wisdom. I thought of the quiet, unshakable strength in knowing a truth that no one else in the room could see. Jennings pushed a heavy, expensive fountain pen towards me. "If you'll just sign here, here, and here," he said, tapping his finger on the signature lines with an air of finality. I picked up the pen. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. The room was silent, save for the faint rustle of papers and the sound of my own steady breathing. All eyes were on me. They watched as I signed my name, Eleanor Vance Miller, on the documents that supposedly signed away my home, my trust, my entire legacy. I signed away the fictional Vance Miller Family Trust. I signed away the marital home that was never marital. My hand was as steady as a surgeon's, making a final precise incision. With each elegant stroke of the pen, I was not surrendering. I was setting a trap. I was winding a clock. I was letting them win the battle so that I could, with absolute and devastating certainty, win the war. When I was finished, I capped the pen with a soft click and pushed the documents back across the table. "It's done," I said. Chloe's smile was a flash of pure, predatory joy, a brief glimpse of the wolf beneath the sheep's clothing. Robert let out a long, slow breath of profound relief. They thought they had won. They had no idea that they had just signed their own eviction notice. They had just started a 60-day countdown to their own complete and total ruin. The divorce was finalized by the court a week later. The decree was a simple, unemotional document that declared our 50-year union dissolved. It incorporated by legal reference the fraudulent settlement agreement I had so willingly signed. A clause standard in Virginia family law stipulated a 60-day period for the execution of all property and asset transfers. For Robert and Chloe, this was a minor formality, a bureaucratic delay before they could cash in their grand prize. For me, it was a countdown. A 60-day clock was now ticking. They didn't wait long to begin their victory lap. Their arrogance was as boundless as their greed. The day after the decree was issued, I was in my bedroom methodically packing a small suitcase when Chloe appeared in the doorway, a look of serene command on her face. She was holding 2 paint swatches in her hand. Eleanor. She said, her voice bright and businesslike, the voice of a new queen surveying her conquered territory. Robert and I were just discussing the master bedroom. Do you think serene sky or coastal mist would do more to open up the space? It gets such lovely morning light. She was asking me, the woman she was displacing, to help her choose the color for the room she would soon share with my ex-husband in the house she thought was now hers. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a final, petty twist of the knife designed to remind me of my defeat. I looked at the 2 pale blue squares in her hand, then met her gaze. I've always been partial to a deep funereal gray. I said, my voice flat and empty of emotion. The barb was so subtle, it sailed right over her head. I finished packing my suitcase. It contained only my clothes, my personal papers from my father's desk, and a few cherished photographs of Jason as a boy before his spine had been replaced by his wife's ambition. I walked through the rooms of my home for the last time, not with sadness, but with the cold, clear detachment of a general surveying a battlefield before the final charge. This was no longer my home. It was a stage, and the final bloody act was about to begin. I walked out the front door without a word of goodbye. I could hear them in the kitchen, their voices bright with laughter as they discussed plans for the renovations. I didn't look back. I got into my car and drove to a small, elegant apartment in a quiet, leafy part of the city, a place I had leased a month prior, using funds from an account they knew nothing about. It was clean, bright, and blessedly empty of ghosts. It was all mine. As I placed the key in the lock and stepped across the threshold, I thought of the 60-day clock that was now ticking down second by second. They were celebrating in my house, sleeping in my bed. They had 60 days of their shared fantasy left. The clock was ticking, and the final alarm would be devastating. The first 30 days passed in a profound and restorative silence. I organized my new apartment, filling its empty spaces with books and light. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the long, slow siege of my marriage's end. I rediscovered the simple, quiet pleasure of a life lived on my own terms, a life where my own needs were not an afterthought. I did not contact them. I did not answer their infrequent perfunctory calls to see how I was settling in. My silence, which they had once mistaken for weakness for the fog of age and grief, was now my shield and my sword. I was waiting. The first tremor in their new world, the first crack in their fraudulent facade, occurred on day 34 of the 60-day countdown. I received a call from a Mrs. Gable, a high-end realtor from a prestigious local firm, a woman whose voice was a smooth blend of professional courtesy and utter confusion. Mrs. Miller, Eleanor Miller. She asked, her tone hesitant. I'm calling about the property at 12 Maple Avenue. Your ex-husband, Robert Miller, and his associate, Chloe Martin, have engaged my services to list the property for sale. We've run into a bit of a snag with the preliminary title search. I remained silent, letting the beautiful, sweet silence hang on the line, forcing her to continue. According to the official county records, She said, a note of bewilderment creeping into her voice. The title to the property is held solely in the name of one Eleanor Vance. There's no record of a Robert Miller ever being on the deed. The settlement agreement they provided is, well, it's contingent on Mr. Miller actually holding the title in order to transfer it. As it stands, he has no legal right to sell this property. I was hoping you could clear this up for us. It must be some sort of clerical error. I'm afraid there's nothing to clear up, Mrs. Gable. I said, my voice as calm and clear as a winter morning. The county records are perfectly correct. The property belongs to me and me alone. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, a silence so complete I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. But the divorce decree, the settlement, she stammered, her professional composure completely shattered. The divorce decree cannot compel me to give away an asset that was never marital property to begin with, I said, simply echoing the words Arthur had spoken to me in his dusty office. Mr. Miller was tragically misinformed as to the nature of his ownership. I do wish you a good day, Mrs. Gable. I hung up the phone before she could reply. I took a sip of my tea and imagined with no small amount of satisfaction the frantic, panicked conversation that Mrs. Gable would now have with Robert and Chloe. The first crack had appeared in their fantasy. The foundation was beginning to shake. Less than an hour later, my phone began to ring. It was Robert. I watched his name flash on the screen, the name of a man who was now a stranger to me. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. It was the first of many, many missed calls. The cracks in their facade began to spiderweb, spreading through the foundation of their fraudulent new life with alarming speed. The panicked calls from Robert became more frequent, more frantic. I listened to one of his voicemails out of a sense of cold, clinical curiosity. His voice, once so confident and smooth, was now tight with a barely controlled rage that bordered on panic. Eleanor, call me back immediately. There's been a ridiculous mistake with the house title, a clerical error. We need to sort this out now. I deleted the message. It was not a mistake. It was a fact. The next blow fell around day 45 of the 60-day clock. This one was even more satisfying. Their plan, as I had overheard them plotting in the dead of night, was to use the substantial funds from the Vance Miller Family Trust to finance their lavish new lifestyle and purchase a modern home together once my house was sold. They walked into the downtown offices of the financial firm that managed the trust, armed with their copy of the divorce settlement, and demanded a full liquidation of the account to be transferred to a new account in Robert's name. The call I received this time was from a Mr. Henderson, the senior trust officer, a man as meticulous and unmovable as Arthur Abernathy himself. His voice was the epitome of professional decorum. Mrs. Vance, he said correctly, using my maiden name as it was written in the trust's charter. I'm calling to inform you of an attempted unauthorized action on your account. A Mr. Robert Miller and a Ms. Chloe Martin were here today presenting a divorce settlement and demanding access to the assets of the Vance Family Trust. I informed them, as per the irrevocable charter established by your late father, that you are the sole trustee and lifetime beneficiary, and that no other party has any legal right whatsoever to these assets. They became quite agitated. I imagine they did I said calmly, picturing the scene in my mind's eye. They insisted that the settlement granted Mr. Miller control. I informed them that this trust is an independent legal entity that predates the marriage by several years and therefore falls entirely outside the scope of any marital property division under Virginia state law. I felt it was my fiduciary duty to make you aware of this attempt. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. You acted correctly and with the utmost professionalism. I hung up the phone. The house of cards was not just trembling now, it was collapsing in on itself. The two main pillars of their grand future, my house and my trust, had crumbled to dust beneath their feet. That evening, the frantic calls started coming from Jason. His voice on the voicemail was a high-pitched, panicked whine, the sound of a spoiled child who has just had his favorite toy taken away. Mom, what's going on? Dad is losing his mind. Chloe said you've hidden all the money and locked up the house. You have to fix this, Mom. Please, you're tearing this family apart. Fix this. He still believed I was the one who had broken it. He still believed it was my responsibility to sweep up the pieces of the lives they had shattered. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to fix. There was only the truth rising to the surface, like a body of water finally finding its own inevitable level. Day 60 arrived not with a bang, but with the deafening silence of my unanswered phone. The 60-day period stipulated in the divorce decree for executing the terms of the fraudulent settlement had officially expired. The clauses related to my assets, the house and the trust, were now legally void of fact. They had finally, and most humiliatingly, come to understand. Their grand fantasy had evaporated. They were left with nothing but a worthless piece of paper and the rapidly approaching consequences of their own greed. That morning, my phone began to buzz and did not stop. It was a symphony of desperation, a frantic digital barrage that was music to my ears. First Robert, then Chloe, then Jason. Then Robert again, his calls coming in one after another, without pause. I watched the screen as the notifications piled up a monument to their complete and utter unraveling. Within an hour, the little red circle on my phone icon read 99 plus missed calls. The number was a testament to the power of silence, a tangible symbol that the balance of power had not just shifted. It had been a mirage all along. Late that afternoon, a registered letter was delivered to my apartment. The envelope was from the offices of Jennings and Howe. It was thick with self-importance. I opened it not with trepidation, but with the weary patience of a teacher opening an obviously plagiarized essay. It was full of blustering threats and legal jargon accusing me of fraud, of malicious deceit, of violating the good faith terms of the divorce. It demanded that I immediately sign the corrective transfer documents for the house and the trust or face severe and immediate legal action. I didn't even read the whole thing. I simply folded the letter, picked up my phone, and called the one number that mattered. "Arthur," I said, when he answered. "The angry letter from the big-shot lawyer has arrived. I expected it would—" He replied, his voice calm and steady, the voice of a man who has seen bigger dogs with louder barks. "Don't you worry about a thing, Eleanor. My response is already drafted and in the mail." Arthur's reply, as he later described it to me with a dry chuckle, was a masterpiece of legal devastation. It was short, brutally professional, and utterly final. It stated the simple, irrefutable facts. It included certified copies of the original 1970 property deed in the name of Eleanor Vance, and the 1972 charter of the irrevocable Vance Family Trust. It politely informed Mr. Jennings that his client's claim was based on a fundamentally fraudulent premise and that any further legal action would be met with a swift and aggressive countersuit for harassment and attempted fraud. 1 week later, a formal eviction notice prepared by Arthur's firm and served by a grim-faced county sheriff was delivered to the front door of 12 Maple Avenue. Robert Miller and Chloe Martin were given 30 days to vacate the property that had never been theirs to begin with. The symphony of missed calls fell silent. There was, after all, nothing left for them to say. The truth had spoken for them. I sit now in the living room of my small, bright apartment. From my window, I can see a park where children play, and old couples walk hand in hand, their movements slowed by time, but not by affection. The quiet here is different from the silence in my old house. It is not a quiet heavy with unspoken truths and the ghosts of betrayal. It is a quiet that feels earned. It is the sound of peace. I hear through a friend who heard from another friend that Robert and Chloe are living in a cramped rental on the other side of town, a place with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. Robert's prestigious architectural firm suffered when word of his personal and financial recklessness got out through the tight-knit Richmond community. Apparently, trying to fraudulently seize assets and evict the mother of your child is bad for business. They sold Chloe's expensive car. Jason, I'm told, still visits them, a moth drawn to a dying flame caught in the sticky web of bitterness and blame they have surely woven. He has not tried to call me again. Perhaps finally he understands. Or perhaps he never will. It is no longer my burden to carry. He made his choices, and I have, finally, after a lifetime of choosing others, made mine. My story is not a tragedy, nor is it a story of revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional affair that consumes the avenger as much as the target. My actions were cold, precise, and procedural. It was not revenge, it was a rebalancing. It was a correction on a ledger that had been dangerously imbalanced for far too long. I simply reclaimed what was always mine, what my father's love and foresight had protected for me all these years. I did not destroy their home. I simply reminded them that they had built it on borrowed ground and had forgotten to ask who held the deed. If you have ever been made to feel invisible in your own life, if you have ever been called a burden or treated like a ghost at your own table, if your silence has been mistaken for surrender, then know this: you are not alone. You are not crazy. And you are not done yet. Sometimes the greatest power is not in shouting, but in observing. It is in the quiet keeping of receipts, both financial and emotional. It is in knowing the absolute truth of your own worth and waiting patiently for the right moment to present the invoice. I pick up my cup of tea. The first sip is hot and it burns just a little. It reminds me that I am still here. I survived. I did not lose a home. I reclaimed a world. And peace, I have learned, does not require an audience. It doesn't need applause. It simply is. My story is finished, but so many others are still waiting to be told. There are women in quiet houses all over the world, women who have been silenced, erased, and told they are a burden. Here, we give them a voice. Thank you for watching True Stories. She Never Told. If my story touched something inside you, if you recognized a piece of your own life in my words, then you understand the truth that many choose to ignore. Don't forget to subscribe to True Stories. She never told and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a story of quiet strength and righteous clarity. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in my place? Your voice matters here.